Welcome, chosen one. They never expected it, not from you, not in their wildest dreams. Do you realize what you've done? In the shadowy realms where witches once believed their unity made them invincible, your light has shattered their darkness. What they called unbreakable has been undone, not by spells or potions, but by your unwavering faith and the divine power within you. How is it possible that one soul, chosen by God, could dismantle what they thought was an impenetrable force? As you step into this story of triumph, let me take a moment to thank every one of you who has supported this mission through Super Thanks. Your generosity isn't just about giving, it's about standing in faith and ensuring this message reaches those who need it most. From the depths of my heart, I thank you for being a part of this divine journey. Your support fuels a light that no darkness can overcome. Now, imagine their fear, those who once thrived in secrecy and shadows. Picture their rituals interrupted, their chants silenced, as they faced the one thing they couldn't conquer. You. What is it about you that terrifies them? Is it your connection to a higher power they cannot comprehend? Or perhaps it's the unyielding strength of your spirit, a force so rooted in God that no darkness could prevail against it. This is not just a tale of survival. It's your story of victory, a testament to the divine promise that no weapon formed against you shall prosper. Isaiah 54:17. So, if this truth stirs something deep within you, take a moment to declare it boldly. Comment 999 below as a sign of your divine alignment and your unstoppable purpose. Now, are you ready to uncover the details of how you stood firm and left them speechless? Let's dive into this extraordinary story of faith, courage, and divine victory. God's chosen ones, they're terrified. You defeated a gang of witches all by yourself. Number 1. The power of singular purpose versus collective chaos. As a chosen one, you don't operate like the rest of the world. While most people depend on groups, intricate strategies, or contingency plans, you walk a different path, a path forged by singular, unshakable purpose. It's not arrogance, it's divine clarity. You understand what many fail to grasp. True power lies not in numbers, but in focused intent. While others panic, overthink, or hesitate, you step boldly into the chaos, knowing exactly who you are and why you're there. That clarity is precisely why you dismantled them. The witches, in their arrogance, thrived on chaos. They drew strength from confusion, feeding off the doubt, division, and distraction they sowed in their targets. Their power depended on the fractured minds of those they sought to destroy. But against you, none of that worked. Have you ever thought about how David must have felt when he stood before Goliath? The Israelite army trembled at the sight of the giant, paralyzed by fear. Yet David, a single shepherd boy with no armor, stepped forward with nothing but a sling, a few stones, and absolute trust in God. He declared boldly, "You come to me with a sword, with a spear, and with a javelin. But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." 1 Samuel 17:45. Just as David's unshakable faith made him victorious over a seemingly invincible enemy, your unwavering clarity allowed you to dismantle their chaos. They believed their numbers would overwhelm you. Their coven, united in chants, rituals, and symbols, was meant to intimidate. But how strong is a group when each member relies on another for strength they don't truly possess themselves? A group without discipline or a shared divine purpose is just noise, chaotic and directionless. You saw through it all, the theatrics, the fear tactics, the illusions designed to confuse and paralyze. Did you notice how their strength fell apart the moment you refused to play their game? Your focus, like a sharp blade, cut through their confusion, exposing their vulnerability. It reminds me of the story of Gideon in Judges 7. Gideon was chosen to lead Israel against the Midianites, an enemy so numerous they were described as thick as locusts. Judges 7:12. But God reduced Gideon's army from 32,000 to just 300 men, instructing him to trust not in numbers but in divine purpose. With that tiny force, Gideon confused and scattered the Midianites, leading to their defeat. Like Gideon, you didn't need numbers or reinforcements to secure your victory. While they leaned on weak ties and superficial alliances, you relied on divine strength and inner resolve. Their reliance on one another, which they believed was their strength, became their greatest weakness. Have you seen how fragile false unity becomes under pressure? When you struck, their so-called unity unraveled. They became scattered, disoriented, and powerless. They believed an army was necessary to defeat you. But they didn't realize the truth. One person with divine purpose is more powerful than 1,000 bound by fear, confusion, and falsehood. Your focus, your clarity, was like a sword of truth slicing through their chaos. While they scrambled to regroup, whispering incantations and grasping for control, you stood firm. Have you ever felt how stillness can be more intimidating than noise? That stillness, your unwavering resolve, became their undoing. They realized then what they should have known all along. A single individual guided by divine clarity and unshaken by fear is unstoppable. In the end, their chaos consumed them. Not because you were louder, stronger, or more numerous, but because your clarity revealed their fragility. Their power, built on illusions and fear, crumbled under the weight of your truth. What happens when darkness faces a light it cannot extinguish? The Bible says, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." John 1:5. Your light, a light born of purpose and unwavering focus, shattered their shadows and exposed their lies for what they were. Their chants faltered, their rituals became meaningless, and their unity shattered like glass. You didn't just defeat them, you exposed their emptiness. One person, one purpose, one unyielding spirit, standing firm while the forces of darkness crumbled into nothingness. This is not just your victory, it is a testament to the power of divine purpose, a reminder that no darkness can stand against the light of those chosen by God. Number 2, you weren't just fighting them, you fought their legacy. Defeating that group of witches wasn't just about overcoming a single battle, it was about tearing down an entire legacy. These weren't individuals acting alone, they carried the weight of generations of dark knowledge, passed down like a twisted inheritance, each layer adding to their illusion of invincibility. Have you ever considered how much power a legacy holds, not just for those who uphold it, but for those who are enslaved by its fear? Every ritual they performed and every spell they cast was built upon the foundation of countless others who came before them, creating a system designed to grow unchecked and unchallenged. But as the Bible warns, woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness. Isaiah 5:20. Their legacy, though vast, was rooted in deception, and its end was inevitable. When you stood against them, you weren't merely fighting their numbers or their immediate strength. You were confronting the weight of their history. The very thing they believed made them untouchable. To them, you were more than an adversary. You were a disruption to the roots of their existence. They thought the lineage they inherited would intimidate you, just as it had silenced so many before. But did they not realize that their strength was an illusion? As it is written, "Unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain." Psalm 127:1. Their foundation was not built on truth or righteousness, but on secrecy, fear, and manipulation. Without divine backing, no legacy can stand. Their legacy was nothing more than a house of cards, teetering on the illusion of eternal strength. The moment you refused to bow to their history, you shattered its power. How did it feel to know that by standing firm, you weren't just defeating them in the present, but unraveling the very system they relied on? The shockwaves of your victory didn't just shake them, it reached into the past, disrupting everything their ancestors had constructed. And what truly broke them was your refusal to play their game. You didn't rely on counterspells, rituals, or ancient texts to fight them. You fought with something they couldn't predict: raw, unbreakable will and the guidance of divine purpose. Just as the Bible declares, the weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. 2 Corinthians 10:4. Your divine strength tore through the very walls of their legacy. That's why they're terrified. They didn't just lose a fight, they lost everything their legacy stood for. In the span of a single confrontation, they watched the foundation of their beliefs crumble. What happens to those who see centuries of power disintegrate in an instant? Their confidence wasn't just shaken, it was obliterated. Their lineage ended with you, not because you fought harder, but because you fought with something they could never possess: the light of truth and the backing of the Almighty. Your victory wasn't just personal, it was systemic. Their defeat was not just the failure of individuals, but the collapse of an entire dynasty of darkness. And in that moment, you weren't just the chosen one. You became the breaker of chains, the one who shattered their twisted inheritance and left them powerless in the face of divine light. For you were once darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Live as children of light. Ephesians 5:8. You walked boldly in that light, and the darkness could not overcome you. Number 3, the fear you struck came from the unknown. Fear isn't just about strength, it's about the unknown. The witches didn't fear you because of raw power in the way they understood it. They feared you because they couldn't figure you out. Have you ever considered how unsettling it is to face something you cannot control, cannot predict? They had spent their lives mastering rituals, symbols, and dark arts, all carefully designed to control and manipulate others. But you didn't follow their rules. You were an anomaly, a blank space in their calculations. And that blank space wasn't just unsettling, it was terrifying. They expected you to react in predictable ways: panic, hesitation, or even blind aggression. That's the game they thrived on, provoking fear, feeding on chaos, and bending others to their will. But what happens when their target doesn't respond the way they expect? When they looked at you, they saw something that defied their understanding: a calm, unshakable presence. You didn't flinch at their illusions, you didn't fall into their traps. And with every attempt to control you, they were forced to confront a truth they had long ignored. There are forces beyond their comprehension. As the Bible declares, the wind blows wherever it pleases. You hear its sound, but you cannot tell where it comes from or where it is going. So it is with everyone born of the Spirit. John 3:8. To them, you were like the wind, impossible to pin down, unyielding and untouchable. The more they tried to test you, the more uneasy they became. Their spells didn't land the way they should have. Their intimidation tactics fell flat. Each failed attempt chipped away at their confidence. How does someone who thrives on control react when they realize their grip is slipping? With every failure to break you, the limits of their power became painfully obvious. They began to see themselves not as the invincible force they had believed, but as something fragile, faltering in the face of a presence they couldn't predict. You didn't just resist them, you reflected back their own weaknesses. That's what truly broke them. It wasn't your strength in the conventional sense. It was your ability to turn their fear of the unknown against them. They had spent so long being the architects of fear, the masters of control. But now, they were stumbling in the dark, unable to decipher the force standing before them. Have you ever noticed how the absence of control breeds desperation? They couldn't overpower you because they couldn't understand you. Their spells and symbols were meaningless in the face of your calm and unwavering focus. You didn't just defeat them, you became their ultimate undoing. You exposed the lie they had built their power on. As the Bible reminds us, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Psalm 23:5. In their presence, you stood not as a victim, but as a force anointed by something greater, untouchable by their fear and darkness. They weren't just defeated, they were left grasping for meaning, unable to overcome what they couldn't predict or understand. You became the unknown. And for those who had lived their lives feeding on fear, the unknown was the one thing they couldn't bear. Number 4, you became the weapon they didn't see coming. Witches are masters of manipulation. Their strength lies not in their spells, but in their ability to uncover the hidden cracks in a person's spirit, those buried fears, insecurities and vulnerabilities, and twist them into weapons. Their power is rooted in deception, in convincing others of their own fragility. Have you ever noticed how fear grows when we allow someone else to define our limits? That's how they break their enemies. But when they turned their focus to you, they found something they had never encountered before, nothing to exploit. It wasn't that you didn't have fears or weaknesses, it was that you had already faced them, dismantled them, and rendered them powerless. How many people can say they've looked their fears in the eye and refuse to let them define their path? You weren't carrying tools or defenses. You didn't need charms, symbols, or rituals. You didn't need anyone to fight for you or protect you. You became the weapon. And this transformation wasn't external. It was entirely internal. Every crack they hoped to exploit had already been filled by something far greater, divine strength and clarity of purpose. Their attempts to attack your mind or spirit bounced back, leaving them scrambling for an angle of attack that simply didn't exist. This wasn't something they could have prepared for. They were accustomed to fighting individuals who relied on external sources of strength, objects they could destroy, allies they could isolate, or strategies they could disrupt. But what happens when your opponent's strength comes from within? When they realized that you were your own source of power, it was already too late. You didn't need tools or trinkets. As the Bible says, "The Lord is my strength and my shield. My heart trusts in him and he helps me. My heart leaps for joy, and with my song I praise him." Psalm 28:7. Your source of power was unshakable, and it wasn't something they could touch. They didn't see a person holding weapons. They saw the embodiment of unyielding resolve. The title, One-Man Army, wasn't about numbers. It was about the shift in power. You weren't standing against them with tools or strategies. You were the weapon. With every step you took closer to them, their illusions stripped away. Do you realize how terrifying it is for those who depend on lies to face someone who embodies truth? Every failed attempt to control you revealed their own vulnerability. They had always thrived on controlling the narrative, but now they were caught in a story they couldn't rewrite. You didn't just defeat them, you dismantled their entire approach to power. Their strategies, rituals, and manipulations, all of it crumbled because they were fighting against something they had no power over. How does it feel to know you've exposed the limitations of their entire system? As the Bible reminds us, no weapon formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue which rises against you in judgment you shall condemn. Isaiah 54:17. The witches weren't defeated by tools or tactics. They were defeated by the transformation within you. Their fear wasn't just of losing, it was of realizing their limits. They thrived on exploiting weaknesses, but you showed them what it looks like when someone becomes untouchable. Have you ever thought about how much power there is in becoming the one thing your enemy cannot break? Your victory wasn't just over them, it was over the entire structure of power they depended on. You were not only unstoppable, you were their undoing. Number 5. Exposing the weakness of their collective power. The witches believed their collective power was their ultimate strength. They relied on their coven, their rituals, and the belief that unity made them invincible. Their chants echoed together, their spells intertwined, and their carefully orchestrated actions projected an image of seamless coordination. But have you ever considered how often an illusion of unity is used to mask fear? Their so-called unity wasn't strength. It was a crutch, a facade that concealed their individual weaknesses and gave them a false sense of security. When you stood against them alone, you exposed the fragility of that illusion. Without the safety of their numbers, they didn't know how to function. They had never prepared to face someone who didn't rely on backup, allies, or layers of external protection. How does someone so dependent on a collective identity react when faced with someone who stands firm in their own purpose? Their courage, fueled by rituals and group dynamics, evaporated in the presence of your self-reliance. As the Bible reminds us, some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. Psalm 27. They placed their trust in their numbers, but you drew your strength from something far greater. Your presence forced them to confront a truth they had long avoided. Their power only worked because they leaned on each other, not because they were truly strong. When you refused to waver, their cracks began to show. One by one, their confidence unraveled as their so-called collective strength was revealed to be hollow. Have you noticed how fear creeps in when the thing people depend on starts to fall apart? Their unity was never real. It was merely a shield against their own terror of standing alone. But you didn't need a shield. You became the sword. What made it worse for them was the isolation you forced them to feel. They had spent their lives projecting fear and loneliness onto others, feeding off the vulnerabilities of those who stood alone. But now, for the first time, they were the ones who felt it. Imagine the irony. The very loneliness they inflicted on others became their undoing. Their solidarity turned hollow, their rituals became meaningless, and their reliance on each other became a burden. Just as the Bible says, if a house is divided against itself, that house cannot stand. Mark 3:25. Their collective power crumbled under the weight of your defiance, leaving them exposed for what they truly were, dependent, fractured, and powerless. You didn't just defeat their group, you dismantled the very foundation of their existence. By standing alone, you revealed how fragile their collective power truly was. They depended on unity to hide their individual weaknesses. But you didn't need numbers to stand firm. Your strength, drawn from within and rooted in divine clarity, stripped away their illusions and left them facing a reality they couldn't escape. You weren't just stronger than their group. You were the embodiment of a power they could neither match nor understand. Number 6. Your victory forced them to confront their own mortality. For the witches, mortality wasn't just something to be feared, it was something they believed they had outgrown. Their spells, forbidden knowledge, and dark rituals all served one ultimate purpose: to create the illusion of immortality. They didn't simply crave power, they sought permanence. They wanted to transcend the boundaries of human limitation and convince themselves that their legacy would stretch endlessly into the future. But have you ever wondered how much fear lies beneath the pursuit of immortality? When you defeated them, you didn't just end their reign, you shattered the illusion they had built their lives upon. Have you thought about how fragile someone becomes when their deepest lies are exposed? Your victory wasn't achieved through brute force or a complex strategy. It was through exposing the truth they refused to face. They had cloaked themselves in the belief that their spells made them untouchable, but they were utterly unprepared for someone who could strip away those layers of false security. When their defenses fell, they weren't merely left exposed physically, they were exposed spiritually. For the first time, they had to confront the terrifying truth they had spent their lives running from. They were mortal, just like everyone else. This realization hit them harder than any physical blow. Their entire identity was built on the idea that they were beyond the reach of time, consequence, and death itself. Have you ever noticed how people who depend on illusions crumble when those illusions fail? Yet, as the Bible reminds us, the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life in Christ Jesus our Lord. Romans 6:23. Their attempts to escape death through dark practices were futile because they were rooted in deception, not truth. Your victory didn't just defeat their bodies, it dismantled their belief system. Every chant, every ritual, every whispered secret of their craft was rendered powerless in the presence of someone who wasn't afraid to confront them. Consider the story of Pharaoh in Exodus. Pharaoh believed his power and legacy would endure forever, that he was untouchable by human or divine intervention. What do you think Pharaoh felt as he watched his empire crumble under the weight of truth? Yet through Moses, God demonstrated that no earthly power, no matter how absolute it seems, can stand against the truth of divine sovereignty. The plagues, the parting of the Red Sea, and the ultimate defeat of Pharaoh's army were not just victories over a ruler. They were a revelation of God's dominion over life and death. Similarly, your victory over the witches wasn't just physical. It was a spiritual declaration that their false sense of immortality was no match for truth and divine alignment. What truly terrified them wasn't just the loss of the battle, it was the loss of their illusion. They realized their immortality was nothing more than a lie. Their power wasn't infinite, and death, the very thing they believed they had conquered, was waiting for them all along. Can you imagine what it's like to confront the reality you've denied your entire existence? Your victory didn't just mark the end of their rule, it marked the collapse of everything they had believed about themselves. You forced them to confront a truth they had tried to bury. They were never untouchable. No matter how many spells they wove or how deeply they delved into forbidden knowledge, they could not escape the universal reality of human mortality. This recalls the words of King Solomon in Ecclesiastes, "For the wise, like the fool, will not be long remembered. The days have already come when both have been forgotten. Like the fool, the wise, too, must die." Ecclesiastes 2:16. Do you see how even the most powerful are subject to the truth of mortality? The witches, much like Solomon observed, built their lives on temporal, fragile pursuits, forgetting that death comes for all who are not rooted in the eternal. Their defeat wasn't just a physical loss, it was a spiritual reckoning. In the end, your victory wasn't just about their downfall, it was about revealing the power of truth over illusion. As the Bible declares, "Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." John 8:32. But for them, the truth wasn't freeing. It was devastating. You didn't just end their reign, you forced them to see their fragility, their limits, and the inescapable reality they thought they had overcome. Number 7. The psychological war was won before the battle began. Long before the first move was made, the battle had already been decided. The witches had built their entire strategy around fear, projecting it, amplifying it, and wielding it as their ultimate weapon. Fear was sharper than any spell they could cast, and it worked because most people believed in the power of their illusions. But have you ever considered how fragile fear becomes when someone refuses to accept it as real? That's where they failed with you. Your unshakable resolve was their undoing. They came at you with everything they had, whispers designed to sow doubt, shadows meant to evoke terror, and illusions carefully crafted to throw you off balance. But instead of faltering, you stood there, unmoved. How often do we forget that fear only has power when we give it permission? Your reaction wasn't arrogance, it was certainty. You knew their tricks could only succeed if you allowed them to take root in your mind. By refusing to grant them that power, you stripped them of their most potent weapon. As the Bible reminds us, for God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. 2 Timothy 1:7. While they thrived on creating chaos, you stood firm in divine clarity and peace. The witches didn't know how to handle someone like you. They had spent their lives feeding off the vulnerabilities of others, preying on hesitation and exploiting weakness. What do manipulators do when they encounter someone who cannot be manipulated? When their tactics didn't work on you, they found themselves lost. The psychological war they relied on to win every battle was suddenly useless. Their fear wasn't just about your immunity to their tricks. It was the fact that your resistance exposed their own dependence on them. Have you noticed how those who depend on deception crumble when the truth stands before them? Without fear to manipulate, they were powerless, and the longer you stood firm, the more their confidence unraveled. They realized too late that they had already lost. Just as Goliath underestimated David, mocking the shepherd boy with his small sling and stones, the witches underestimated you. They expected fear, hesitation, and defeat, but instead they faced someone whose unwavering faith turned their strongest weapon into nothing more than smoke. The Bible tells us, "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid?" Psalm 27:1. In the light of your resolve, their darkness had nowhere to hide. This wasn't a battle of spells or physical strength. It was a battle of wills, and yours was untouchable. Do you see how unshakable faith can dismantle even the most insidious strategies? By the time they understood this, the fight was already over. Fear didn't control you, and because of that, they couldn't control you. You didn't just resist them, you dismantled their entire way of fighting before the first blow was even struck. Their defeat wasn't just about losing the battle, it was about losing the very foundation of the power they thought made them invincible. Number 8. You weaponized their own tools against them. The witches thrived on arrogance, wrapped in the belief that their mystique made them untouchable. They cloaked themselves in dark arts, relied on their numbers, and built carefully constructed illusions of power to maintain their dominance. For years they counted on one simple truth: no one would dare stand against them, especially not someone standing alone. To them, your presence was laughable, a single person daring to challenge their entire legacy. But have you ever noticed how arrogance blinds even the most powerful to their own vulnerabilities? That blindness was where their downfall began. Their overconfidence became their undoing. They underestimated you, assuming that their reputation and numbers would crush you before the fight even began. Have you considered how dangerous it is to dismiss someone who refuses to be intimidated? They didn't see you as a threat. They saw you as an inconvenience. Their arrogance was their greatest weakness, and you turned it into your most powerful weapon. You didn't fight them on their terms or by their rules. Instead, You let their own sense of superiority do the work for you. Every time they leaned on their mystique, it backfired. They thought their rituals and symbols would intimidate you, but instead they revealed how much they depended on theatrics. Their dark arts, meant to instill fear, only exposed the emptiness behind their power when you remained unmoved. They assumed their numbers would overwhelm you, but their lack of individual strength became glaringly obvious when faced with your unshaken resolve. As the Bible says, "The Lord is with me, I will not be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me?" Psalm 118:6. Their unity, which they believed to be unbreakable, crumbled when confronted by your refusal to be cowed. The irony was devastating for them. What they believed made them invincible. Their reputation, their dark arts, and their unity became the very things that left them vulnerable. Have you ever seen someone's strength collapse under the weight of their own pride? They built their power on assumptions that no one would challenge them, that their rituals made them untouchable, and that their numbers ensured victory. You shattered those assumptions simply by standing firm. Their overconfidence, once their shield, became the sword that cut them down. You didn't just defeat them, you turned their own tools against them. Their arrogance, their mystique, their reliance on fear, all of it became the foundation of their downfall. Do you see how self-made illusions can become the most dangerous traps? As Proverbs teaches us, pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. Proverbs 16:18. Their belief in their invincibility blinded them to their own weaknesses, and you used that blindness to dismantle everything they stood for. Their miscalculation wasn't just a mistake, it was the fatal flaw that cost them everything. They fell not because of the weapons you brought into the fight, but because of what they failed to see in themselves. Their arrogance, their overconfidence, and their reliance on fear ensured their collapse. How often do those who seek to dominate fail to see that their own pride is their greatest vulnerability? In the end, you didn't just defeat them, you turned the very essence of their power into the tool of their destruction. Number 9, their rituals couldn't touch your energy field. The witches built their identity and power around their rituals, incantations, and mastery of dark energy. These weren't just tools, they were their assurance that they could bend reality and overwhelm anyone who stood against them. They believed their spells, woven with low-frequency intentions, could pierce even the strongest minds. But what they didn't realize was that their power was fundamentally limited. Their rituals couldn't touch you because you operated on an entirely different plane. While they depended on fear and manipulation, you stood rooted in divine strength. Every dark intention they hurled at you bounced off because their low vibrations couldn't penetrate your high-frequency resilience. Have you ever wondered what happens when darkness tries to confront a light it cannot diminish? They tried to weave illusions around your mind, hoping to draw you into their web of manipulation, but their efforts fell flat. Your energy wasn't just defensive, it was offensive, neutralizing every attempt they made. As the Bible declares, God is light. In him there is no darkness at all. 1 John 1:5. Your alignment with light meant their darkness couldn't find a foothold. They didn't know how to handle someone who radiated such unshakable strength. Their spells relied on exploiting cracks in people's spirits, but you had already confronted and sealed those cracks within yourself. Do you see how self-mastery becomes an unbreakable armor? They depended on their victims doubting themselves, but you carried no such doubt. As Psalm 23:4 reminds us, "Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." Every attempt they made to dominate you only revealed their own fragility. Their magic faltered because it relied on fear, and you gave it none to feed on. They had spent their lives bending others' energies, forcing people into submission. But what happens to manipulators when they can no longer control their targets? You didn't flinch. You didn't waver. Your energy field wasn't just impenetrable, it actively repelled them. They had never encountered someone who could stand in stillness and dissolve their dark intentions with nothing but presence. The irony was unmistakable. The very tools they depended on became the proof of their own limits. They had always believed their rituals made them unstoppable, but they failed to understand that their power was entirely conditional. Have you seen how easily power crumbles when its foundation is fear? You didn't just withstand their attacks, you outshone them. As Isaiah 61 proclaims, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you." Your presence wasn't just unshaken, it was triumphant. In the end, their spells, incantations, and dark energy collapsed in the face of your unshakable strength. Their failure wasn't just about losing a battle, it was about realizing that their power was always limited. You didn't simply resist them, you exposed their dependency on fear, manipulation, and secrecy. Their rituals were only as strong as the belief others placed in them, and you showed them that belief no longer existed. Your victory wasn't just about standing firm, it was about exposing the truth. Their power was never invincible, and their dark arts crumbled when faced with light and truth. As John 1:5 reminds us, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Your light didn't just protect you, it dismantled their illusions, revealing their weakness for all to see. You didn't just defeat them, you proved that no darkness can touch the one who walks in divine alignment. Can you imagine the moment they realized their strongest weapons were useless against you? That was the moment you triumphed, and their power dissolved into nothingness. Number 10. They realized they couldn't corrupt you. The witches were masters of corruption. Their true power didn't lie in their spells or rituals, but in their ability to twist the hearts and minds of others. They thrived on exploiting human weakness, planting seeds of doubt, offering temptations that seemed irresistible, and slowly pulling their enemies into a web of manipulation. For most, it wasn't a question of if they would fall, but when. But have you ever wondered what happens when corruption meets an unshakable spirit? That's what they found in you, a moral compass so unyielding that their every tactic failed before it even began. Their strategy was clear. They would tempt you with the allure of forbidden knowledge, the promise of power, or the guarantee of safety. They tried to make you question your path, to bend your convictions, and to pull you into their world. How many before you had fallen for such temptations? But what they didn't understand was that their offers didn't appeal to you. You didn't crave their power because you already understood the truth of where real power comes from. As the Bible warns, what good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? Mark 8:36. Your soul was not for sale. Your unyielding integrity became the wall they couldn't breach, the shield that rendered them powerless. Their failure to corrupt you wasn't just a tactical misstep, it was a revelation of their own dependence on manipulation. They had always assumed that everyone had a price, that every person would eventually bend under the weight of temptation. But you didn't falter. Why? Because you didn't define your worth by what they could offer. Do you see how strength grows when you know your value isn't tied to others' approval or promises? Every time they tried to plant doubt or lure you with promises of glory, their failure became more glaring. You didn't need their approval or their gifts because your strength came from within. As their attempts to manipulate you unraveled, so did their own sense of invincibility. They were used to pulling others into their web, turning their enemies into pawns. But with you, their web broke apart, leaving them exposed. They relied on tactics of seduction, on breaking people piece by piece until they became tools for the witch's will. But when their tricks didn't work, they had nothing left to fall back on. Have you noticed how manipulators crumble when their prey refuses to play their game? Your resistance didn't just protect you, it revealed their fragility. Their power wasn't real power. It was house of cards, built on the illusion of control. They didn't have true strength. They had the ability to convince others to abandon theirs. But you refused to play by their rules. You stood firm, and that choice became the mirror that reflected their own emptiness. As Proverbs 10:9 reminds us, whoever walks in integrity walks securely, but whoever takes crooked paths will be found out. Your unwavering resilience not only shielded you, it exposed them. Without the ability to corrupt you, they were powerless. In the end, they didn't just fail to manipulate you, they unraveled in the face of your strength. What happens when those who thrive on deception realize they can't deceive? Their tactics, their strategies, their entire way of operating crumbled because their power relied on convincing others to surrender. You didn't surrender, and in your refusal, you dismantled their illusion of control. Your victory wasn't just about standing firm, it was a triumph of truth over deception. Their corruption failed not because they lacked skill, but because you were incorruptible. They believed they could bend you, but they didn't understand the strength of someone who values integrity above all else. Your resilience wasn't just a shield, it was a weapon. Against someone who cannot be broken, their power was meaningless. You stood tall, and their empire of manipulation collapsed. Without the ability to bend you to their will, they were left with nothing but their own fragility. You didn't just defeat them, you exposed the emptiness at the heart of their power. Number 11. You didn't defeat them for glory. You did it because it was necessary. The witches were accustomed to fighting for glory, power, or revenge. Every move they made, every spell they cast, was driven by personal ambition. They wanted to be revered, feared, and envied. Their entire existence revolved around the need to dominate, to be seen as untouchable forces of superiority. Their power was rooted in self-interest and ego, and they thrived on recognition from others. But when they faced you, they encountered something they had never prepared for. Someone who wasn't interested in fame, power, or applause. How do you manipulate someone who has no interest in personal gain? That was the question they were forced to confront. You weren't fighting for accolades or the satisfaction of defeating them. In fact, you weren't even fighting for yourself. Your purpose was entirely different. You fought because it was necessary, because the very existence of their dark power demanded it. They couldn't understand this level of detachment. They couldn't comprehend someone whose actions weren't fueled by selfish motives. As the Bible says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves. Philippians 2:3. Your humility and unwavering focus on the greater good made you immune to their usual tactics. This detachment made you unpredictable in ways that terrified them. They couldn't bargain with you, sway you, or distract you with empty promises. Have you noticed how powerless manipulators become when their usual tools fail? They tried to lure you with promises of forbidden power, control, and recognition, but you didn't flinch. You didn't need their approval, and you certainly didn't need their rewards. They couldn't appeal to your ego because you had none to exploit. Your actions were guided by a singular truth. Their reign had to end. Every move you made was rooted in necessity, not ambition. This purity of purpose was something they couldn't grasp. They were used to enemies who could be swayed by fear, greed, or vanity. But you weren't trying to prove anything. You weren't driven by fear of failure or the desire to be praised. Instead, you were acting out of duty, a sense of responsibility that went far beyond personal interest. Have you ever seen how powerful someone becomes when they act with no need for recognition? That's the strength they faced in you. To the witches, this was a nightmare. Their entire strategy depended on manipulating the desires and fears of others. But you didn't have desires they could tempt, nor fears they could exploit. Your resolve was rooted in something they couldn't touch, the understanding that some things must be done simply because they are right. As Paul wrote, "Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters." Colossians 3:23. Your focus wasn't on personal gain, but on fulfilling a mission that transcended yourself. This purity of purpose was what broke them. They realized they had no leverage over you, no way to twist your actions to serve their plans. What happens to those who thrive on manipulation when their tools no longer work? Every attempt they made to sway you fell flat, and with each failure, their confidence crumbled further. They had built their power on the ability to control others, but they couldn't control you. Your resilience exposed the hollowness of their power, revealing that it was never rooted in strength, but in the weakness of those they manipulated. Your victory wasn't about triumph for the sake of triumph. It was about doing what had to be done. You weren't there to bask in glory or collect trophies. Your strength came not from seeking recognition, but from your unwavering commitment to truth and justice. As Jesus said, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled." Matthew 5:6. You weren't swayed by the allure of personal gain because you were already fulfilled by your connection to a higher purpose. In the end, your unshakable duty dismantled their carefully calculated strategies. Do you see how true power lies in acting from a place of selflessness? They weren't defeated by brute force or clever tactics. They were defeated by your purity of intent. They realized too late that they couldn't touch you, couldn't manipulate you, and couldn't control you. Without the ability to bend you to their will, they were left with nothing. Your resolve didn't just protect you, it revealed their emptiness. Their failure wasn't just about losing the battle, it was about being forced to confront the truth of their own fragility. Without the ability to corrupt or manipulate, their power evaporated. You stood firm, unshaken by their attempts, and in doing so, you didn't just end their reign, you revealed the truth. That selfless purpose is a strength they could never match. Number 12. You revealed their true nature to themselves. The witches spent their lives weaving a web of fear and secrecy, carefully constructing an image of invincibility that concealed their true nature. Their power relied not on genuine strength, but on carefully maintained illusions. Illusions that convinced others, and perhaps even themselves, that they were untouchable. Have you ever wondered how much effort it takes to uphold a lie that even the liar begins to believe? They hid behind rituals, spells, and theatrics, using these as tools to maintain control. But when you stood against them, you didn't just challenge their dominance. You forced them to confront a truth they had avoided for years. Their power was nothing more than a fragile facade. The very foundation of their strength, the thing they had spent their lives perfecting, was built on lies. By refusing to be intimidated or manipulated, you stripped away the masks they had so carefully crafted. And the most striking part, you didn't need to fight them with force or trickery to expose them. It was your presence, your unwavering refusal to bend, that unraveled the illusion. Have you noticed how lies crumble when faced with someone who refuses to believe them? Every time they invoked fear, you stood firm. Every time they attempted to manipulate your perception, you resisted. With each act of defiance, you revealed the emptiness beneath their so-called power. They couldn't hide from the truth anymore. Their power wasn't real. It was an illusion designed to keep others in fear and submission. Their spells and rituals, which they used to project invincibility, were nothing more than props in a play meant to deceive. As the Bible declares, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. John 8:32. But for them, the truth didn't bring freedom, it brought devastation. When you stood before them, you became a mirror reflecting back the reality they had tried so hard to deny. In standing against them, you made them face the one thing they couldn't escape, their own weakness. What happens when someone who thrives on deception is forced to see the truth for the first time? They realize too late that the strength they'd relied on was hollow. The illusion crumbled, and with it went their sense of self. For the first time, they were forced to see the emptiness of their existence, the fact that their power had never been genuine. Your victory wasn't just a physical defeat. It was a psychological reckoning that shattered everything they thought they were. They didn't just lose the battle. They lost their identity, their sense of self, and their grip on the very thing they had spent their lives protecting, the belief that they were untouchable. As Proverbs 16:18 reminds us, pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. Their pride, their arrogance, and their refusal to see the truth were the very things that led to their downfall. You didn't just reveal their weakness to others, you forced them to confront it within themselves. The most devastating part for them was the timing of this self-revelation. They saw the truth only after it was too late. By the time they realized the extent of their deception, both to others and to themselves, they had already been defeated. Have you ever seen the moment when someone realizes their entire foundation is built on sand? That moment was their undoing. Your presence, your unwavering resolve, was enough to unravel their carefully constructed lies, leaving them with nothing but the emptiness they had tried so desperately to hide. Your victory was more than a triumph over their power. It was a dismantling of their identity. They weren't just defeated, they were broken. Their loss wasn't just about the battle, it was about being forced to see who they truly were. And, in the light of that truth, their illusions of invincibility dissolved, leaving them powerless and exposed. Number 13. Your legacy will outlive their myths. The witches built their mythology over centuries. Their names were whispered in fear, their rituals treated as sacred and untouchable, and their coven exalted as an immortal force of darkness. They shaped themselves into legendary figures, thriving on the idea that their power would be remembered forever. Each generation of their coven added new layers to the myth, strengthening the illusion that their collective power was eternal and invincible. Have you ever wondered how much fear is required to sustain a legacy built on lies? They wanted to be remembered as the ultimate force of evil, a power that could not be challenged. But when you stood alone against them, you didn't just defeat them, you dismantled the very narrative that gave them relevance. Their mythology, carefully woven over centuries, crumbled in the face of your unrelenting truth. How often does a single act of defiance expose the fragility of even the most enduring myths? You proved that, no matter how ancient or collective a power may seem, it is not beyond challenge. As the Bible reminds us, for the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds. 2 Corinthians 10:4. Your courage became the weapon that tore down their stronghold of fear and deception. Their myths, the stories of invincible witches, of dark forces that ruled without question, were shattered. Their legacy wasn't as unassailable as they believed. By standing against them, you didn't just confront their power, you exposed the lie at the heart of their existence. They had spent generations convincing others, and perhaps even themselves, that they were beyond defeat. But in a single moment, you showed the world that their power was neither eternal nor absolute. What happens to a myth when the truth behind it is revealed? Their supposed immortality gave way to your unrelenting resolve, leaving nothing but the empty shell of their fabricated legend. Your legacy, unlike theirs, is built on truth. Future generations won't remember the witches' names with fear. They'll remember your courage. You didn't just win a battle, you became a symbol of defiance, a living reminder that no force of evil, no matter how old or entrenched, can withstand the light of truth. As Proverbs 4:18 says, "The path of the righteous is like the morning sun, shining ever brighter till the full light of day." Your actions illuminated the darkness they had worked so hard to cultivate, and that light will continue to shine long after their myths have faded into obscurity. Your story will be told and retold, not as a tale of conquest, but as a testament to the power of standing alone against overwhelming odds. Can you imagine how your legacy will inspire others to face their own battles, knowing that truth and courage can overcome even the darkest forces? While their names are forgotten, your story will endure. You showed that true power isn't found in numbers, rituals, or fear. It's found in the courage to expose lies and stand for what is right, no matter the cost. Their legacy has ended, but yours has just begun. You didn't just defeat their mythology, you replaced it with a greater truth. In time, their myths will dissolve into nothingness, but your story, your legacy, will remain a beacon of hope, a reminder that even the most fearsome legends can fall in the presence of unyielding truth and courage. Beloved Chosen One, no dark power, no matter how grand, can erase the legacy you've created. The witches, with all their myths and illusions, will be forgotten, but your name will echo through history as the one who shattered their lies. You didn't just defeat them, you became the living proof that their grand stories of invincibility were nothing more than smoke and mirrors. You showed the world that one person standing resolute in truth can change the course of history. Your victory wasn't just about defeating a group of witches. It was about dismantling everything they represented. You stripped away their illusions, exposed their weaknesses, and forced them to confront their own fragility. And you did it not for glory or fame, but because it was necessary. That selfless purpose, that unwavering commitment, is what sets your legacy apart. You didn't rely on brute strength or clever tricks. You fought with something far more powerful: purpose, integrity, and an unshakable moral compass. While they built their power on fear and deception, you stood firm, proving that true power doesn't come from numbers, spells, or control. It comes from the unwavering courage of a single resolute soul. The legacy you've forged will echo through time. Their myths will fade, but your story will live on as a testament to the truth. Future generations will speak of you not as a mere conqueror, but as a beacon of light, a living embodiment of the idea that no darkness is too deep and no enemy too powerful when you stand firm in your identity and purpose. The witches believed they were eternal. They were wrong. You have shown that true power, eternal power, resides in courage, truth, and the light that refuses to be extinguished. That is a victory that can never be undone, a truth that will endure long after their myths have turned to dust. To my incredible audience, if this journey resonated with your spirit, I encourage you to help us continue sharing messages of empowerment and truth. Your support through Super Thanks fuels this mission, helping us reach even more chosen ones across the globe. But whether you donate or not, know this: you're valued, appreciated, and loved. Your presence here means the world to me, and I'm deeply grateful that you've chosen to be part of this journey. Thank you for your time, your energy, and for believing in the power of truth. May blessings overflow in your life, and may your light shine brighter with each passing day. Remember, no matter what you face, you have the strength to stand firm and rewrite the narrative. If you found this message inspiring, don't forget to like this video, share it with others who need to hear it, and comment below with your thoughts. Let us know how this story touched you and keep the conversation going. Together, we're building something extraordinary. Until next time, stay strong, stay courageous, and stay true to yourself. Your journey doesn't end here. It's just the beginning. May peace and blessings be with you always.